My name is William Harris, and in the Texas heat, my own family tried to commit me to a clinic to get their hands on my house and my money. They planned every step as if I wouldn't notice, but they forgot that betrayal only makes me stronger. This is the story of how I turned the tables and turned their trap into my greatest revenge. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're listening from. In Texas, the August heat seems to stick to your skin like a sentence. I was on the porch, watching the sun sink into the horizon, when Mark, my oldest son, appeared with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Dad, we need to talk." His voice sounded too calm, like someone preparing the ground for a blow. I felt my stomach churn before he even sat down. And deep down, I already knew. That conversation wasn't about care, it was about power. He began with calculated reminders. "You forgot to pay the electricity bill last month. You almost burned the rice the other day." I laughed, trying to break the weight of those words. "Mark, it happens to everyone." But he didn't laugh. He just stared at me, like someone assessing a building before demolition. It was in that look that I realized they were building a story about me. In the following days, Emily, my daughter, repeated the same script. "Dad, are you sure you're okay? You're so forgetful." Always ahead of someone else, as if each sentence were a piece of the puzzle that would paint me as an incapable man. Even the smell of fresh coffee in the morning seemed to lose its warmth when accompanied by those quick glances between them. Pamphlets for nursing homes began to appear on the kitchen table. Emily said it was out of care, but there was no affection there, only strategy. Betrayal cloaked in concern, and I began to realize that even the sound of the kettle boiling felt like a clock ticking away the time I had left. One night, I heard Mark in the backyard whispering into the phone, "Yes, he doesn't notice anything. We'll sort it out and sign it soon." The cicadas chirped loudly, but they didn't muffle the impact of those words. My blood ran cold. It wasn't paranoia anymore. A plan was afoot, and I was the prize. The changes came quickly. Mail opened before reaching me. Unknown accounts in my name. The checkbook disappearing and reappearing as if nothing had happened. Even the musty smell in the closet seemed complicit, revealing that my home was no longer fully mine. The trigger came when I found a letter from a lawyer addressed to Emily in the trash. The first lines talked about guardianship proceedings and transfer of assets. This wasn't just theft. It was a kidnapping of my life. Slow, silent, and perfectly calculated. That night, the room felt hotter than ever. The fan spun slowly, each rotation a reminder that time was running out. But along with the fear, something old was born. An instinct for revenge I'd thought I'd forgotten. I decided I'd let them believe their own lie. I started acting more distracted, purposefully forgetting things. And while they felt in control, I was hoarding every detail, every sentence, like ammunition. In the sweltering Texas heat, a game began. Silent, dangerous, and without return. They thought I was losing my mind, but what I was losing was only my patience, and that they were yet to find out. 2 days after finding that letter in the trash, I heard Mark's truck pull into the driveway, the engine still warm. Through the living room window, I saw him unload a heavy black briefcase as if it held the future itself. When he entered, the smell of dust and leather wafted over him. "Dad, I brought some papers for us to sort out. Just sign them," he said, setting the briefcase on the table. The way he said, "just sign," made my heart race and my hands go cold. He opened the folder with the calm of a poker player holding the winning card. There, among contracts and documents, was a power of attorney and a transfer of ownership form. The name of my house, my land, and of course, my name already typed in the previous owner section. The tip of the blue pen rested on the paper like a snake, ready to strike. "Don't worry, Dad. It's just paperwork. It'll make your life easier." Emily arrived shortly after, carrying a tray of lemonade and a smile too fake to be genuine. "Sign it quickly, Dad, so we don't miss the visit to the notary." The way she placed the glass in front of me felt more like an ultimatum than kindness. The drink was cold, but my throat was too dry to swallow. The citrus scent of the lemonade mingled with fear, and I knew if I picked up that pen, there would be no going back. As I pretended to read each page, I realized that the value of my house was right there, appraised at $430,000, but not a single cent was earmarked for me. The entire estate would go to the family administration, which coincidentally was headed by Mark and Emily. The theft was no longer a suspicion. It was there in front of me, printed and waiting for my signature. "Dad, you trust us, don't you?" Mark asked, forcing eye contact. That word, trust, hurt more than any other. It wasn't a question, it was a test, a low blow. I took a deep breath and let the silence speak for me. They interpreted it as hesitation, but it was actually calculation. I needed to get out of there without arousing suspicion. I feigned difficulty reading, rubbed my eyes and muttered, "My head's heavy. Maybe I'd better sign another day." Emily forced a smile, but the muscle in her jaw twitched. "Okay, but don't delay. The lawyer said the deadline is short." It was pressure, but also desperation, and that meant there was still time for me to act. As they left, I stared at the closed folder on the table. The clock seemed louder than ever. I knew that within those papers lay the key to what they called the future, and that for me, it meant imprisonment. Not physical, but of independence. I needed to turn the tables before they erased me from my own life. That night, I waited for everyone to fall asleep and went to the office. The sound of the wooden floor creaking with each step reminded me that I was moving through enemy territory. I opened my secret drawer, the one even they hadn't realized existed. Inside were my passport, my savings card, and a flash drive with scanned copies of all my documents and property records, including the original deed to the house registered in my name. I looked out the open window and felt the warm Texas wind brush my face. Revenge was taking shape, but I needed more. I needed clear proof that they were trying to take me down while I still had my breath. And deep down, I knew the right moment to act was approaching, and that when it arrived, there would be no room for mercy. I closed the folder again, turned off the light, and went back to bed, but sleep wouldn't come. In the darkness, I could only think one thing. They believe time is on their side, but starting tomorrow, time will work for me. And when that happens, every signature they tried to force will be the proof that will destroy them. 2 days later, Emily insisted I go for a routine checkup at the local clinic. She said it was to ensure my health, but the way she avoided eye contact put me on edge. The Texas sun burned my skin as I walked up to the entrance, and the strong smell of disinfectant hit me like a punch. Inside, the frigid air conditioning contrasted with the temperature outside, and the sudden chill reminded me that if I wasn't careful, my entire world could soon become as sterile and controlled as this place. As I waited, I saw a woman in a blue lab coat hurry down the hallway. Her hair was tied in a simple bun, and she had a firm but weary look in her eyes. When she approached to call my name, I noticed something different. There wasn't that condescending tone everyone had been using with me lately. "Mr. Harris, please come with me." Her voice was direct, without the artificial weight of false concern. At the doctor's office, she asked me to sit down and began taking my blood pressure. The silence between us was interrupted only by the beeping of the machine. Suddenly, she looked me in the eye and said, "I don't know what's going on in your family, but something isn't right, and I'm not going to pretend I don't notice." The sentence hung in the air. My entire body went alert. For the first time in weeks, I felt like maybe I wasn't completely alone. She introduced herself as Laura Benson, a nurse at the clinic for over 10 years. She said she'd seen similar cases before, relatives bringing seemingly healthy elderly people for evaluations, trying to coax diagnoses that would justify guardianship. "Your medical records don't show anything that indicates cognitive impairment," she said, leafing through the papers. "But I noticed they asked to expedite some specific tests." I cautiously explained the documents I'd found, the pressure to sign, and the lawyer's letter. Laura frowned and took a deep breath. "This is serious, Mr. Harris, very serious." The way she said the word serious made me feel the true weight of the situation. "If you'd like, I can keep copies of your exams and record medical observations that prove you're fully conscious, but you'll need to proceed calmly." The smell of alcohol and freshly printed paper filled the air as she sorted through some forms and instructed me on how to proceed. "If they think you're suspicious, they can speed up the process." I felt a chill run down my spine. The image of the black folder on my office desk came back to me, along with the feeling that every second was now precious. Laura handed me a card with her handwritten number. "Any suspicious activity, call me, no matter the time." I looked at that piece of paper as if it were a key, maybe not to immediate freedom, but to the proof that could save everything I'd built. For the first time since this began, I felt like I had an ally. When I left the clinic, the sun was already setting. Golden light reflected off the windows, and the warm air felt lighter than when I arrived. But deep down, I knew that feeling was illusory. The war had just gained a new front, and this time, I had someone on my side. On the way home, I thought about how Laura could be the missing piece in my plan, but I also knew that if Emily and Mark found out about her, they might try to cut any bridges between us. From that day on, every conversation, every encounter would have to be carefully calculated. And that night, as I closed my bedroom door, I felt something was about to happen. The game was no longer just me against them. Now there was a third player, and this, for my family, could be far more dangerous than they imagined. Over the next few days, I began to act resigned. I let Mark and Emily believe I was becoming more forgetful, that I had forgotten where I'd left my keys, that I was taking a while to remember a neighbor's name. It was all calculated. Deep down, each little lapse was a smokescreen to cover what I was really doing, preparing a silent counterattack. In Texas, you learn early on that it's not just strength that wins a fight, it's the right moment to strike. Laura and I agreed on a simple system to communicate without arousing suspicion. I would leave an envelope with a symbol drawn on it, an X inside a circle, at the clinic's reception desk, and she knew that meant urgent. In return, she would hand me small packages with documents and instructions inside books I checked out from the local library. No direct phone calls, nothing that could be intercepted. The first step was to ensure that all my assets were protected. I grabbed the flash drive with the house deed, copies of my bank statements and investment records, and went to the only bank whose manager I still trusted. There, I opened a private safe deposit box, which only I had access to. "Do you need anything else?" he asked, and I simply nodded. The metallic smell of the safe and the crisp sound of the door closing reassured me that at least one part of my life was safe. Laura also helped me create a detailed medical record, with notes from her and other professionals attesting to my full mental capacity. These documents, kept as securely as my possessions, would be the weapon to destroy any claim of incapacity my family might try to fabricate. The irony was that while they believed they were surrounding me, I was surrounding them. At home, I continued to feed their narrative. "Emily, where did I leave my glasses?" I asked, even though I knew exactly where they were. Every time she looked at me with that air of false compassion, I remembered the house's value written on the deed, $430,000, and that rekindled my desire to see their plan fall apart. At night, in the silence of my room, I mentally reviewed every step.
I couldn't afford to make a mistake. Revenge would only be effective if it was precise and indisputable. More than recovering what was mine, I wanted them to feel the weight of each maneuver, to realize too late how much they'd underestimated me. One afternoon, Mark casually remarked, "The lawyer said we can get it all sorted next week." That confirmed to me that the deadline was fast approaching. I needed to act quickly, but without any apparent rush. Laura reinforced, "Let them believe they're in control. That will make them careless." I followed his advice. I began to notice even more how Mark always checked the mail before me, how Emily's tone of voice changed when speaking on the phone. Every detail went into my mental archive, like pieces of a puzzle that would soon reveal the whole picture. That night, as I listened to the distant sound of a train cutting through the city, I sensed the time was approaching. The trap was set, but it needed the perfect trigger, and I already knew where to find it. In the very registry office where they intended to bury me alive in paperwork. And it was there in the darkness of my room that I decided the next step wouldn't be defensive, it would be the first strike. And when it happened, no one in my family would forget it.
The invitation came on a sultry morning, with the smell of burnt coffee still in the air. Mark entered the room carrying a piece of paper folded in three like a simple note. "Dad, we're going to the notary's office on Thursday. It's just to formalize a few things and take a weight off your shoulders." He spoke as if offering assistance, but the cold gleam in his eyes betrayed that the weight he wanted to lift wasn't mine. It was their bank account. Emily walked in soon after, already dressed as if for an important meeting, her sweet perfume leaving a cloying trail down the hallway. "It'll be quick, Dad, don't worry. The lawyer has already prepared everything." The word attorney echoed in my head like a gunshot. It was no longer a behind-the-scenes move. Now they wanted to end the match in front of me. That same day, I found Laura in the library, pretending to leaf through a detective novel. I sat at the table next to her and slipped a note into the book she was holding. Thursday, notary's office. She didn't look at me. She just turned the page and wrote discreetly, "I'll be ready." The sound of pages turning was the only noise that broke the tension of that silent encounter. On Wednesday night, I prepared everything. I grabbed the flash drive, copies of my documents, the original deed, and the medical records proving my full capacity. Each document was stored in a leather folder I inherited from my father, and which, ironically, they hadn't even remembered existed. As I zipped it up, I caught the scent of antique leather mixed with a faint, dusty aroma. It was like sealing a capsule with my future inside. The next morning, the sky was overcast, as if all of Texas sensed something momentous was about to happen. In the car, Mark chatted about trivialities, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. Emily, in the back seat, texted non-stop on her phone. The silence between us was only broken by the sound of the engine and the imaginary ticking of a clock that seemed to count down the seconds until the trap closed. We arrived at the registry office and were greeted by a thin man in a gray suit who shook my hand with a practiced smile. "Mr. Harris, it's a pleasure. Let's get this over with so you can rest." Rest. That word sounded like a sentence to me. I was led into a small room where fluorescent lighting made everything feel cold and impersonal. On the table, the papers were already organized, with spaces marked for my signature. Mark pushed the pen toward me. "Here, Dad, just sign and that's it." The smell of fresh ink and the metallic feel of the pen in my hand seemed like a reminder that this moment was irreversible. I looked at them both and saw the rush in their eyes, and also the confidence. They believed they had already won. I took a deep breath and let my hand hover over the paper.
The silence in the room grew so thick I could almost hear the buzzing of the lamp. Then, with a small smile, I pulled my leather briefcase from under my chair and placed it on the table. "Before I sign, I think you'll want to see this." Emily arched her eyebrow. Mark frowned, and for the first time, I felt the ground beneath their feet begin to shake. It wasn't time to reveal everything yet, but I wanted you to know something was about to change. Because in that cold courtroom, the match was just beginning, and they still had no idea what cards I held.
The sound of the zipper opening seemed to echo through the room. Mark and Emily looked at each other, confused, as I slowly pulled the documents from the leather folder. "Before any signatures, I need you to read this." I placed the original deed for the house on the table, along with the medical report signed and stamped by 3 different professionals. The Notamy's lawyer leaned forward, adjusting his glasses, and the mood began to change. The report was clear: full mental capacity and autonomy for decisions. Laura had been meticulous. The pages contained dates, test results, and observations that invalidated any argument about supposed memory loss. Emily tried to hide her nervousness, but the way she clutched her purse in her lap betrayed her discomfort. "Dad, that's not necessary," she began, but her voice sounded weak. "Necessary? I think it's essential," I replied, also sliding forward the scanned copies of the deed and property records. "These papers prove that this house, valued at $430,000, is mine, and any attempt to transfer it without my consent is a crime." The lawyer cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable, and leaned back in his chair. Mark crossed his arms and tried to regain control of the conversation. "We're trying to help, Dad. It's for your own good." The cynicism in his voice almost made me laugh. "For my own good or yours? Because from what I see, this document here transfers everything to family management, which coincidentally is just the 2 of you." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the hum of the overhead light. At that moment, I pulled a flash drive from my briefcase. "Here are copies of all the conversations, messages, and records that prove you planned this, including a call from you, Mark, in which you said that I don't understand anything and that we'll sign soon." His face flushed. Emily looked away. The lawyer ran his hand over his chin, assessing the gravity of what he was hearing. "You can continue with this, but know that if you do, it will be a public process, and I will not back down." I spoke calmly, but the firmness in my voice was enough to change the air in the room. The smell of paper and fresh ink now seemed tinged with tension. Every breath was measured, as if everyone there was afraid to move. The lawyer sighed and slowly removed the original documents from the table. "Perhaps we should review this agreement, Mr. Harris." Mark leaned forward, whispering something to Emily, but I didn't need to hear it. I already knew that from that point on, the tables had turned. I stood up calmly, putting each paper back in the folder. "I want everything recorded: this meeting, your presence, and what I refused to sign." The lawyer nodded, visibly uncomfortable, and I walked to the door, each step feeling lighter. Stepping out into the hot Texas sun, I realized the battle was won, but the war wasn't over yet. They weren't going to give up that easily, and I wasn't going to let them off the hook. The next step would be to make sure they paid for every robbery attempt, and that I was already planning. And deep down, I knew what was coming now wouldn't be defense. It would be attack. That same afternoon, before the Texas heat had dissipated, I was already in the office of a trusted lawyer, the same one who had handled my affairs when I bought my first property. The leather-covered armchairs and the faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee reminded me that this was safe territory. I placed the leather briefcase on the desk and, without rushing, showed him all the documents, recordings, and medical reports that proved not only my full capacity, but also the betrayal plan Mark and Emily had been hatching. The lawyer, a soft-spoken man with a sharp gaze, didn't need long to grasp the gravity of the situation. "Mr. Harris, with this, we can not only nullify any attempted guardianship, but we can also prosecute them for attempted fraud and embezzlement."
He adjusted his glasses and added, "And for the amount involved, they could face criminal charges." The word criminally sounded like music to my ears. The next day, a formal summons was sent to both of them. I imagined the scene, the mailman knocking on the door and delivering an official envelope, their faces paling as they read each line. I heard from neighbors that Emily cried and that Mark, for the first time in a long time, was speechless. For someone who thought he was so clever, the downfall came quickly and painfully. Meanwhile, Laura continued to help me record every step. She jotted down dates, times, and their reactions, creating an impeccable dossier. "This will be useful if they attempt any retaliation," she said, tucking the notes into an envelope. The silent partnership we'd forged had become one of the sharpest weapons in my arsenal. Within a week, their lawyers contacted me, trying to negotiate. The proposal was absurd, that I dropped the case in exchange for family peace and a payment of $20,000. I laughed to myself when I heard that. After they tried to rob me of a $430,000 house, they still thought they could buy me with pocket change? I refused without hesitation. "Tell them that family peace ended the day they decided to betray me," I replied to my lawyer. Saying this was like opening a window and letting out hot, heavy air. For the first time in months, I took a deep breath without feeling the bitter taste of humiliation. The following days saw a slow demolition of their confidence in their own plan. The process moved quickly, and each new hearing was another blow. Mark tried to maintain his composure, but his voice trembled as he answered questions. Emily avoided my gaze, always staring at the floor. The masks were slipping, and there was no longer any way to hide her shame. The most gratifying thing was seeing the judge definitively dismiss any guardianship request and acknowledge in the minutes that there had been an attempted fraud against me. The decision also included a recommendation that both of them be investigated for suspicious transactions in joint bank accounts. Not only did I regain full control of my life, but I also ensured that they would have to explain themselves to the authorities. As I left the courthouse, the sun was beating down on my face, but this time it didn't bother me. It was as if the light illuminated not only the street, but also a new path I was about to take. There was still one last step, something that didn't involve lawyers or documents, just my decision to cut all ties and start over. And I knew exactly how to do that, leaving no doubt that that chapter of our story was over forever. The morning after the judge's ruling, I woke to a different silence in the house. It wasn't that heavy, suspicious silence, but a clean silence, like the air after a storm. The sun streamed through the curtains, and the Texas heat seemed less oppressive. For the first time in months, I sipped my coffee without looking over my shoulder. The cup steamed, and the strong aroma reminded me that there was still life to be lived, and that I had won. My first action was simple, but symbolic. I changed all the locks. The crisp sound of the new latch locking into place was like a final full stop. Next, I called the bank and closed any accounts linked to Mark or Emily. Online passwords were changed, and each new layer of security was like a brick in the wall that now protected me. This wasn't just precaution, it was the rebuilding of my freedom and autonomy. Laura came to visit me that afternoon. She brought a walnut cake and the same firm smile that had accompanied me since the day we met. "You did it, Mr. Harris," she said, placing her hand on my shoulder. "They won't get over this anytime soon." The gratitude I felt for her was indescribable. If it weren't for the courage and the evidence she helped me gather, I might be locked in an institution today, watching my life being sold piece by piece. I also did something they didn't expect. I put the house up for sale. Yes, that same house they tried to take. I received an offer of $450,000, and I accepted without hesitation. I used part of the money to buy a smaller house, closer to the city center, and the rest I invested in travel and an account that, this time, only I could access. Seeing the sold sign in front of the old house was like watching the final scene of a movie that finally has the right ending. When news of the sale reached them, it didn't take long for them to try to call me. The calls went straight to voicemail. Messages filled with apologies, pleas to start over, and even some veiled accusations that I was destroying the family. But I knew. Family isn't about those who share a surname. It's about those who don't try to destroy their lives for money. This was a lesson they wouldn't forget. The next step was even more liberating. I changed my routine. I started going to the local club, made new friends, and started walking through the park every morning. With each lap, the fresh air reminded me that I was breathing on my own, with no one trying to steal what was mine. Revenge was complete, but what remained was not just the taste of victory, it was the peace of having overcome. Laura remained present, and our friendship grew. We drank coffee together on the same bench in the square, where months before I'd sat alone wondering how to escape the trap. Now, we sat to talk about travel, books, and everything that might yet come. Life was open again, with no strings attached to my neck and no fear that someone would try to cut me off. I also began investing part of my time in helping others in the community. I shared my story anonymously in local groups, alerting seniors to signs of manipulation and attempted family theft. Each conversation was a reminder that even in the worst situations, there's always a way to turn things around. And that, more than anything, was true overcoming. I didn't look back. There was no final meeting, no goodbyes. Mark and Emily were in the past, along with their failed plan. And I moved forward, certain that every step I took was now mine, earned and protected. I needed nothing more from them, not even an apology. My life was whole again. Because in the end, it wasn't just about stopping a robbery. It was about proving, to them and to myself, that my story wouldn't end as they'd planned. And that in the Texas heat, a betrayed man can find the strength to reinvent himself and live better than before. And you? Would you accept losing everything in the name of family peace, or would you fight until the end? In my case, the betrayal came from within my home, and that only made me stronger. My story ended in overcoming, but yours may be starting now. Protect what is yours and never underestimate your own strength. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to hear more stories like this. And tell me in the comments, have they ever tried to take something away from you that was rightfully yours?